And a returning train bumped into a parked train on Steel Vengeance.
Top Thrill 2 was in full operation then, but just over about a week later, it's been running for like 2 weeks with some previews and stuff. The ride is closed.
Cedar Point has announced the closing of its Snake River Expedition boat ride, which debuted back in 2021. Top Thrill Dragster will not reopen.
Saturday night when a cable snapped on the Skyhawk swing.
Metal detectors at the Steel Vengeance roller coaster.
Changing a policy that bans carrying cell phones.
Two trains collided.
This amusement park has been consistently failing, but no one is talking about it. Today, I want to tell you the story of Cedar Point, which is an amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. This park is world famous for having the best roller coasters, but it seems like everybody is ignoring their consistent failures. This park has had issue after issue, problem after problem, and incident after incident. This is the failure of Cedar Point. In 1989, Cedar Point built Magnum XL 200, the first roller coaster over 200 feet. After Magnum was built, parks all over the world wanted to take its record for the tallest roller coaster. This era has been dubbed the Coaster War. The Coaster War ended in 2007 after Cedar Point built Maverick, one of the best coasters in the world that was super short. This showed parks that a coaster does not have to be tall to be good. Maverick wasn't without flaws though. After it was built, they had to change the layout, removing an inversion because the inversion was too intense. And the ride struggles with consistent downtime to this day, but overall, it ended up being a success. But the first coaster that was truly a failure was built in the midst of the Coaster War. This ride was Top Thrill Dragster.
Coming in 2003 to Cedar Point. Hot drag racing action like you've never had it before.
Top Thrill Dragster cost $42 million in today's money. But even with the hefty price tag, this ride was an absolute nightmare for Cedar Point. Top Thrill faced downtime daily. If you decided to get in line for Top Thrill, the odds were that most likely it was going to go down some point in your wait. This was due to its 0 to 120 miles per hour hydraulic launch, which was way too advanced for its time. Not to mention the ride was insanely expensive to operate every day. Dick Kinzel, the CEO of Cedar Fair, called Top Thrill Dragster his dumbest decision. This was especially substantial coming from him due to how critical he is of himself in his biography. He explained that Wicked Twister was a fill-in coaster, which probably led to his removal in 2021. He also talked about the failure of Disaster Transport, explaining that it was a junk ride in a box. So the fact that he claims Top Thrill as his worst mistake says a lot. Dick Kinzel would end up announcing his retirement in 2010, narrowly avoiding an absolute tragedy ride for Cedar Point. Junior Gemini was Cedar Point's kiddie coaster. Though this ride is literally 19 feet tall, it ended up being a huge part of Cedar Point's history. When parks need a roller coaster, they talk to a roller coaster manufacturer. The park tells the manufacturer what model of the ride they want and work with the manufacturer to construct the ride. The park mainly tells manufacturers things like space and what the ride needs to accomplish, while the manufacturers do all the designing, constructing, and everything else needed to make the roller coaster into reality. So obviously, roller coaster manufacturers are a super important factor on a roller coaster success. Now, Junior Gemini was the first roller coaster made by Intamin. This kiddie coaster kicked off some of the best rides at Cedar Point. Cedar Point ended up working with Intamin to construct the world's first 300-foot coaster in 2000, before Top Thrill Dragster or Maverick. The coaster was named Millennium Force. The ride was an immediate hit with the public. Its never seen before cable lift brought trains to the top of the first hill super fast, but they did cause many problems with the ride. At the end of the day though, it was a small price to pay for a ride as successful as Millennium Force. Next, Cedar Point turned to Intamin for Top Thrill Dragster, which obviously didn't go well. But Cedar Point gave him another chance with Maverick, which we talked about earlier as well, and was a hit with the public. This happened while Cedar Point's parent company, Cedar Fair, was purchasing many more Intamin rides for their amusement parks as well. In 2010, Cedar Point wanted a water ride. The park mainly operated in the summer and was most busy on hot summer days, so it only made sense to add another water ride to their collection. They decided to trust Intamin with another project, and together, Cedar Point and Intamin constructed Shoot the Rapids.
Riding wild rivers my whole life. Had some hair-raising adventures too, but none compared to the likes of Shoot the Rapids.
With 2 huge drops and 2,100 feet of raging rapids, it's a thrilling wild river adventure. New at Cedar Point, Shoot the Rapids.
This river ride
Disaster. This ride was a disaster. The ride was not ready for opening day due to numerous difficulties with the ride. The ride vehicles were not only too big for their trough, but the boats were unbalanced when loaded with passengers. Two silly, careless mistakes for a $10.5 million investment. Eventually, when the ride opened, it opened to okay reviews. It wasn't a great ride. I mean, watch the POV at literally like 10 times speed. The ride is boring. And the select audience wasn't really clear. It was a bit too intimidating for kids, but adults were often enjoying the good attractions in the park. And adding to the list of problems, the park couldn't even load full boats because it had to completely close rows to be able to balance the boats correctly. Overall, the ride was a failure. July 19th, 2013. The ride had already been seen as a complete disaster. Its ridership numbers were really low. That day, a boat left the station and had some problems engaging with the lift hill. The boat flipped over, leading riders upside down, underwater. Many people got in the water to help flip the boat upright. Everybody ended up being okay. One person was transported to the hospital, but they were also okay. So now, not only was the ride a failure, it was a problem. It gave Cedar Point bad publicity and hurt their reputation, which can be detrimental to an amusement park. Long story short, after more problems, the ride was closed for good in 2015, only standing for 5 years. This ride, along with another failed ride at King's Dominion, caused Cedar Fair to never work with Intamin again, destroying a once strong relationship. The $10.5 million spent on this ride only hurt them, but this was just the beginning. In 2014, Cedar Point had to remedy one of their previous failures in Mantis. Mantis was a stand-up roller coaster built in 1996. The ride was said to be painful, and at the end of the day, after walking around, standing in line, and being in the sun, why would somebody want to stand on a roller coaster instead of sit down? That's exactly where this ride went wrong. It was just a gimmick. It's hard to blame Cedar Point too much for this one though, as many parks in the 1990s were purchasing these stand-up roller coasters. Anyways, in 2014, Cedar Point fixed their mistake by converting Mantis into Rougarou. The only real difference with the Rougarou is that it was a sit-down roller coaster rather than a stand-up. Though the ride was rough, it made the experience a bit more enjoyable. The ride doesn't have insanely high ridership today just because of its uninteresting layout in a park filled of amazing roller coasters, also because it genuinely hurts, but overall, it was definitely a good decision to remedy the past mistake of Mantis. Next, in 2016, Cedar Point built Valraven. What do you guys say? Another hit. It's a dive coaster, and they chose B&M for the manufacturer. B&M has a reputation of being super reliable and safe, making this a great choice for the park. The only roadblock Valraven faced was a small train collision in 2019 that kept the ride closed for a few weeks. Overall though, a great pick for the park. Cedar Point wanted to follow the success of Rougarou and Valraven with one of the best roller coasters the world has ever seen. They turned to the roller coaster manufacturer RMC to convert their old crappy wooden coaster into one of the best roller coasters in the world. To this day, many people find it to be their favorite roller coaster of all time, being loaded with airtime and insane inversions. This ride was named Steel Vengeance. But for Cedar Point, this was another nightmare. Opening day 2018. The ride opened to rave reviews until about halfway through the day when two trains collided. No one was severely hurt, but the ride got a super bad reputation through the media since day one. It was obviously super disappointing for roller coaster fans who had spent a lot of money hoping to get on the ride. Later that year, a teenage boy threw a hot sauce packet while on the train and got in a woman's face. The woman ended up needing her eyes flushed from EMT. The ride later that year had some drive tires pop out of its brake run and land in the queue, again closing the ride. This all occurred in Steel Vengeance's opening year, which led to super unfortunate media coverage and a bad reputation among the general public. This ride also faces excessive downtime. I've also heard many things about structural issues on Steel Vengeance leading to a lot of maintenance having to be done on the ride, but I'm not 100% certain this was a huge problem or anything out of the ordinary for a ride with a wooden structure due to conflicting sources. The biggest problem with Steel Vengeance after opening though was Cedar Point's many failed attempts at loose article policies. Cedar Point tried so many different ways to ban phones from the ride because when the ride opened, so many people lost their belongings on the ride. Not only was this unfortunate for guests, but it was super dangerous considering a phone or a key might hit somebody on the ride. Cedar Point tried many things to remedy this problem. When it opened, all items that fit in a pocket were allowed on the ride. From July 20th to the end of 2018, all items were banned from the ride and queue, with the only way to store your stuff being in pay lockers. In 2019, there were pouches on the train along with metal detectors in the queue. In 2020, they scrapped the whole full pouch system and did a complete ban of all items in the queue and on the ride, with paid lockers again. From 2021 to present day, there are free lockers placed at the end of the queue. Overall though, Steel Vengeance was a mess for Cedar Point to deal with. Inconsistent to all other failed rides in the park, Steel Vengeance faces a lot of unneeded downtime to this day. Cedar Point has always been called the roller coaster capital of the world, so thrill seekers love it, but with recent additions they have tried to cater more towards families and kids. Cedar Point's next disaster is Forbidden Frontier in 2019, an interactive experience that was almost like a real-life video game sending kids on a huge interactive adventure. From what I've heard, the attraction was super well done, kids loved it, and overall it was just super well made and had immersive theming, but it failed, closing in 2023, 4 years after opening. There are a few key problems with Forbidden Frontier. First of all, it was sort of in a hidden spot and away from the rest of the park, so it wasn't convenient where a kid could walk past and want to go to the attraction, leading us to the second reason it failed. Nobody understood what it was. From the entrance or advertising, it just wasn't clear that this was a story-driven video game, immersive experience with activities for kids. So when people walk past it, what reason would they have to walk through the entrance when they have no idea what it is? And it's not like you were able to see the attraction from the entrance due to how far back the attraction was from its own entrance. In a park where you walk around and see this, why would you settle for this if you don't have any prior information as to what it was? The last reason I think it failed is it's just not meant for Cedar Point. Cedar Point is filled with world-class rides for adults and smaller family-friendly rides for kids. People who like riding attractions go to Cedar Point. So Forbidden Frontier was made for a completely different audience than what Cedar Point attracts. Overall though, it sucks to see a project with so much effort and care go into it be such a huge disaster. In 2021, Cedar Point introduced Snake River Expedition, a scenic themed boat ride with actors. Snake River Expedition wasn't a bad experience by any means, but it was absolutely another failure. This was definitely meant to be a long-term addition, but it was torn down in 2024 after only 3 years of operation. Just to show how disappointing this is, let's take a look at some of other Cedar Point attractions and how long they lasted. Blue Streak has been operating since 1964. Cedar Creek Mine Ride had been operating since 1969. Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad has been operating since 1963. Super Himalaya has been operating since 1970. Rides aren't supposed to last 3 to 5 years, but the thing is that these rides fit in the park. All of these are either thrill or family rides. The only one that isn't is the train, which is a themed experience, but it gets you from point A to point B, so it actually has a purpose. The long-term classic rides that have lasted so long, they last because they fit at Cedar Point. With rides like Snake River Expedition or Forbidden Frontier, they just don't fit in the park at all. That's why they've closed 3 or 4 years after opening. No matter how immersive these good experiences are, they aren't for Cedar Point. I understand the park wanted to reach a new audience with these rides, but it didn't work, so they need to stop trying with these immersive family experiences, because they are not working. Not to mention, there's a very good amount of Cedar Point guests who have season passes, so specifically for Snake River Expedition, it's a one and done ride. The whole ride is about the immersive experience, so once you've done it once, there isn't really a reason to do it again. And for the newcomers, they're most likely there for the literal world-class roller coasters, not story-driven boat rides. Overall, I genuinely hope Cedar Point stops trying to make these Disney-type rides. They don't work here. They won't work here. Immersive roller coasters or thrill rides would, but immersive family experiences, they clearly have not worked. After Cedar Point went 0-3 for their themed attractions, they decided to remedy another past mistake and remove what Dick Kinzel called a fill-in coaster in Wicked Twister, and decided to make a family coaster, Wild Mouse, in its place in 2023. The ride worked pretty well, sorta. Opening year, the ride faced a lot of downtime and modifications due to some sloppy mistakes by the ride manufacturer, so the first year was kinda tough for the ride, but now in 2024, the ride seems to be operating much more smoothly and seems to be liked by adults and kids alike, making for a great family attraction. Overall, smart for Cedar Point to make a safe choice building Wild Mouse, especially considering the risk they take 1 year after. August 21st, 2021. A flag plate came off of Top Thrill Dragster as the ride was traveling near 120 miles per hour. The flag plate struck a guest, leaving her in critical condition. She ended up surviving, but to my knowledge has long-term injuries from the incident. This gave Cedar Point the worst media coverage they've had in years. The ride was standing but not operating until Cedar Point announced Top Thrill Dragster as we know it would never operate again. Which brings us to 2024, where Cedar Point introduces Top Thrill 2.
Experience the excitement, the speed, the adrenaline of high-performance racing on an all-new vertical speedway. Introducing Top Thrill 2.
But there was a problem making Top Thrill 2. The original Top Thrill dragster was manufactured by Intamin, but Cedar Point doesn't work with Intamin anymore because of Shoot the Rapids. So Cedar Point took a massive risks in attempts to lower the cost of the project and chose Zamperla to manufacture Top Thrill 2. The only problem is Zamperla manufactures family rides. Zamperla's tallest roller coaster prior to Top Thrill 2 was 115 feet tall, and now they were tasked to redo the second tallest roller coaster in the world at 420 feet. A few weeks before the ride's opening, they announced they'd have a strict loose article policy, banning some shoes and all loose articles. The only way to store all of your items had to be in paid lockers. The public was understandably upset, but most people found it to be a minor inconvenience for a highly anticipated ride. The ride experience ended up being incredible. It might be one of my personal favorite roller coasters I've ever ridden. It opened to rave reviews. Zamperla did it, and it seems like Cedar Point risk paid off. 9 days after opening, Cedar Point announced that the ride would have extended downtime due to some mechanical issues. The ride's been closed since. This was devastating for Cedar Point. Many people booked trips just for this ride, all of them now disappointed. I have no idea if this will just be a small roadblock of a successful ride, but as of right now, it looks like Cedar Point is paying the consequence for going with the budget option, leading to Top Thrill 2 most likely being another failure. That's it. That's where the story stops. Cedar Point is trying to fix Top Thrill 2, trying to make sure it doesn't join their list of complete failures, and I genuinely hope this park can pull it together and have a long run of successful attractions, but honestly, with their track record, it looks kind of unlikely. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks for watching.